I felt the Falcon shudder violently under my hands. 1 second, we were making our approach to the uncharted planet. The next, something invisible slammed into our ship with enough force to throw me against my harness. What the hell was that? I gripped the control yoke, trying to steady our descent. Alarms blared throughout the cockpit, red warning lights flashing across every console. Beside me, Mark's fingers flew across the systems panel, his face lit in the harsh glow of emergency indicators. "Primary stabilizers failing," Mark said, his voice tight but controlled, attempting to reroute through secondary systems. From the navigation station behind us, Lance's voice rose above the cacophony of alerts. "All instruments are going crazy. Altitude readings jumping all over the place. I can't get a fix on our position." The Falcon lurched again, pitching sideways. My stomach dropped as we began to spin, the control yoke fighting against my grip. Through the viewport, I caught disorienting glimpses of nothing. No planetary surface, no horizon, no stars, just darkness. "Mark, I need those stabilizers." I fought to keep my voice level. "Working on it," Mark replied, the calm in his voice belied by the sweat beading on his forehead. "Something's interfering with all our systems. It's like—" Another violent shudder cut him off. A panel to my left exploded in a shower of sparks, forcing me to shield my eyes. "Primary engine failing," the ship's computer announced, its flat voice somehow more terrifying than the alarms. "Switch to auxiliary power," I ordered, reaching for the emergency protocols panel. Lance called out from behind us, his voice higher than normal. "David, there's nothing out there. The sensors can't—" The main engine died with a whine that dropped to silence. The sudden absence of its familiar rumble hit me like a physical blow. "We're in freefall," I said, staring at the dead indicators. "Brace for impact." I looked up through the viewport, expecting to see the approaching surface of the planet we'd spent 3 months traveling to survey. Instead, there was only that all-consuming darkness, a void so complete it seemed to drink in our ship's exterior lights. Not the darkness of space with its distant stars, not the darkness of a stormy atmosphere. This was wrong, absolute, hungry. "What the hell kind of planet is this?" Mark whispered beside me. I had no time to answer. The impact came without warning, no visual cues, no gradual resistance. One moment we were falling, the next we hit something solid with bone-jarring force. Metal screamed around us. My body slammed forward against the harness, then snapped back as secondary impacts rocked the ship. Something cracked hard against my face. The taste of copper filled my mouth as my teeth cut into my lip. The main lights died, plunging us into momentary blackness before emergency systems kicked in, bathing the cockpit in dim blue light. Sparks rained from damaged consoles, the air filled with the acrid smell of burned wiring and hot metal. I blinked away blood from a cut above my eye, struggling to focus. "Status report," I managed, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. "Mark? Lance?" Mark groaned beside me, fumbling with his harness. "Primary systems down. Life support. Switching to backup. Hull integrity compromised in Section 3, but auto seals are holding for now." When Lance didn't respond, I twisted in my seat. He was slumped forward against his restraints, a thin line of blood trickling from his hairline down the side of his face. "Lance is down," I told Mark, already unfastening my harness. "I'm checking on him." My legs felt unsteady as I pushed myself up. Pain lanced through my ribs, bruised or cracked, I couldn't tell. The ship gave one final groan of protest, metal settling with a grinding sound that reverberated through the deck plates beneath my feet. Then, silence fell, broken only by the soft ping of cooling metal and Mark's labored breathing. I made my way to Lance, checking his pulse. Strong, regular, just unconscious. "He's alive," I called to Mark. "How bad is the damage?" Mark was hunched over his console, trying to coax information from the damaged systems. "Bad. Communications array is offline. Main power cells are drained. Environmental systems are functioning, but on reserve power only. I moved to the nearest viewport, expecting to see the planetary landscape we'd come to survey. Instead, I found myself staring into absolute darkness. Not the darkness of night, but something far more complete and unnatural. Our external lights penetrated maybe 10 feet before their beams simply stopped, swallowed by whatever waited outside. "Mark," I said quietly, "come look at this." He joined me at the viewport, his face reflected in the glass, blood smeared across his temple. "That's not right," he whispered. "That's not right at all." The darkness pressed against the viewports like something alive, something watching, something waiting. I pulled back from the glass, shaking away the strange thought. We'd crashed on an uncharted planet, not landed in some kind of sentient void. Yet the absolute nothingness outside made my skin crawl. Our external lights pushed outward, illuminating nothing beyond a small bubble around our ship before their beams simply ended. "We need to check the systems," I said, turning away from the unsettling view, "and get Lance back on his feet." Mark nodded, looking almost relieved to have something practical to focus on. We made our way back to where Lance lay slumped at his station. I checked his pulse again, still strong, and gently tapped his face. "Lance, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered. Mark found the emergency kit under the navigation console and handed me a stimulant patch. I pressed it against Lance's neck, and within seconds, his eyes opened fully. "What?" He tried to sit up too quickly and winced. "My head." "Take it slow," I told him, helping him upright. "We crashed. Hit your head pretty hard." Lance blinked several times, his gaze wandering around the damaged cockpit. "The planet. Did we make it?" Mark and I exchanged looks. "We hit something," I said carefully. "But I'm not sure it's the planet we were aiming for." Once Lance could sit on his own, we helped him to the command chair. Blood had dried in a thin line down the side of his face, but the cut wasn't deep. His pupils responded normally when I checked them with a pen light. "I need you both focused," I said. "Let's get a full damage assessment." Mark went to the engineering station, bringing systems online one by one. The news got worse with each diagnostic. "Main power cells are completely drained," he reported. "We're on backup, maybe 30% capacity. Life support is functioning but rationed. Environmental controls, minimal lighting, basic systems only." I checked the navigation and communication stations. "Communications array is physically damaged. External antenna was sheared off in the impact." Lance managed to pull up the ship's schematics on his console. "We've got a hull breach in Section 3. The auto seal's engaged, but they're not holding properly. Air's leaking out slowly." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. Standard rescue protocol required a functioning emergency beacon, which we didn't have. Without it, mission control would have no way to track our position or even know we'd crashed. "Let's prioritize," I said. "Lance, can you seal that breach properly? Mark, see if you can get the backup transmitter online. I'll try to figure out where the hell we are." Lance nodded, still looking pale but determined. "I'll need the patch kit from Storage Bay 2. Mark was already pulling apart the communications panel. If the internal components aren't damaged, I might be able to reroute the transmitter through secondary systems. While they worked, I turned my attention to the sensor arrays. Every reading came back blank or with error messages. No atmospheric composition, no gravity readings, no surface scans. Nothing matched any planetary profile in our database. I tried the manual telescope, pointing it in different directions through the viewports. The result was always the same. Our ship's lights extended a short distance, then nothing. No stars above, no landscape below, just that impenetrable darkness. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, checking the instruments again. "We should be reading something, even if it's just void space." From the back of the cockpit, Lance called out, "David, I need help with this patch." I found him in the narrow corridor of Section 3, wrestling with a large sheet of emergency sealant. The hull breach wasn't visible. The auto seals had covered it, but the warning lights around the sealed area flashed red, indicating the seal wasn't complete. "Hold this end," Lance instructed, pressing one corner of the patch material against the wall. "I need to activate the adhesive evenly, or it won't hold." The work was precise and difficult. We could feel the subtle pull of air being sucked through tiny gaps in the auto seal. Lance moved methodically, his earlier disorientation replaced with focused concentration. After 20 minutes of careful application, the emergency light switched from red to yellow. "That's as good as it's going to get," Lance said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "But it's temporary. This material isn't meant for long-term use. 3 days, maybe 4, before it starts to degrade." We returned to find Mark hunched over the communications array, a tangle of wires exposed. His fingers were bloody from where he'd cut them on sharp metal, but he barely seemed to notice. "Almost there," he said without looking up. "The transmitter itself is intact. Had to bypass the main controls and connect it directly to power." A few minutes later, a small green light blinked on the console. Mark sat back, exhaustion clear on his face. "It's working," he said, broadcasting an automated distress call on all emergency frequencies. Basic information only, ship ID and emergency code. No coordinates, though, since we don't know where we are. I nodded. "Good work, both of you." We gathered in the main cabin, our backs to the viewports. None of us wanted to look at that consuming darkness anymore. I pulled up the supply inventory on my tablet. "We have emergency rations for 3 people for 8 days, I said. "Water recyclers are working, so that's not an immediate concern. Oxygen is the bigger issue with that hull breach, even with Lance's patch. We're slowly losing air." Mark ran his hands through his hair, leaving it standing on end. "Someone will pick up our signal. The Falcon was due to check in with Mission Control tomorrow. When we don't, they'll start looking." Lance nodded, but his eyes kept drifting toward the viewports. What if they can't find us? What if we're not even where we're supposed to be? I had no good answer for that. The navigation system showed we'd followed our planned route until moments before the crash, when something had interfered with all our instruments simultaneously. "One step at a time," I said finally. "We've got the distress signal broadcasting. The hull is patched. We have supplies. Now we wait." But as I looked at their faces in the dim emergency lighting, I knew what they were thinking. The same thing I couldn't stop thinking about. That absolute darkness outside, waiting just beyond our failing ship. 3 days passed in our damaged ship with no sign of rescue. The distress signal continued to broadcast steadily into the void, but only silence answered. I tried not to dwell on how unlikely it was that anyone would find us in this strange darkness, focusing instead on keeping the Falcon operational and my crew sane. The temporary patch Lance had applied to the hull breach in Section 3 held, though the yellow warning light occasionally flickered to red before stabilizing again. Our air supply remained steady for now, but I'd noticed subtle changes in the atmosphere, slightly thinner, slightly colder. The ship's automatic systems were compensating, but I knew they couldn't do so indefinitely. I woke on the 3rd morning to find Lance's bunk empty. This wasn't immediately concerning. Sleep patterns had become irregular for all of us since the crash. The blue emergency lighting cast everything in a perpetual twilight that made normal day-night cycles impossible to maintain. But when I entered the cockpit and saw Lance standing motionless at the main viewport, something felt wrong. He stood with his palms pressed flat against the glass, face inches from the surface, staring into the darkness outside. He didn't turn when I approached. "Lance," I kept my voice casual. "How long have you been up?" He didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice came out hushed. "There's something moving out there." I looked past him. The familiar, maddening nothingness pressed against the glass. Our external lights created the same bubble of illumination they always had, reaching about 10 feet before being swallowed completely. "I don't see anything," I said carefully. "It's just beyond the light." His breath fogged the glass slightly. If you watch long enough, you can see it, shapes moving, shifting. I placed a hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. "When did you last sleep?" He shrugged off my hand. "I'm not imagining things, David. It's out there." Mark appeared in the doorway, looking between us with concern. His face still showed bruising from the crash, a purple shadow across his left temple. "Everything okay?" "Fine," Lance snapped, finally turning away from the viewport. "I'm going to work on the comms array. Maybe I can boost the signal strength." He brushed past Mark, leaving us exchanging worried glances. I sighed, running a hand through my unwashed hair. "He was staring out there for at least an hour," Mark said quietly. "I came in earlier, and he didn't even notice me." "Keep him busy today," I replied. "The more focused he stays on repairs, the better." Mark nodded. "I've got plenty that needs fixing. We'll check the oxygen recyclers again, then see if we can squeeze more power from the backup cells." We fell into our tasks for the day. I monitored our resources, cataloging our remaining rations and calculating how long we could survive if rescue didn't come. The numbers weren't encouraging. 8 days of food had seemed plenty when we first assessed the situation, but now, with 3 days gone and no response to our signal, those 5 remaining days felt alarmingly short. Lance worked with Mark on the recyclers for several hours, seemingly back to his normal self. He made technical suggestions, even managed a weak joke about our situation. But twice I caught him pausing in his work, head tilted slightly as though listening to something only he could hear. By midday, he'd abandoned the pretense of working altogether. I found him back at the viewport, this time in the rear observation bubble where the view of the darkness was even more expansive. "Lance, we need your help with the power couplings," I said. He didn't turn around. "Do you hear that?" A chill ran through me. "Hear what?" "Voices. Not clear, but familiar." His fingers tapped against the glass, like they're calling from far away. I moved closer, listening carefully. The only sounds were the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional ping of settling metal as the ship cooled. "There's nothing out there, Lance. No one's calling. You just can't hear it yet." There was something wrong with his voice, a dreamy quality that hadn't been there before. I needed to know if this was physical or psychological. "I'm going to check the air scrubbers. Maybe the carbon dioxide levels are rising." He didn't respond, just kept staring outward, so I left him there and went to the environmental control station. Mark was already there, running diagnostics. "Oxygen levels are normal," he reported before I could ask. "Carbon dioxide well within safe parameters. Air scrubbers functioning at 92% efficiency." "That's not it then," I muttered. Mark looked up. "You thinking something's affecting Lance? Because I've been wondering the same thing. He claims he's hearing voices outside, seeing movement in the darkness." Mark's mouth tightened. "I thought it was just stress and isolation getting to him, but he's getting worse by the hour." He lowered his voice further. "David, he told me earlier that the voices are telling him how to fix the ship, that they know what happened to us." I considered our options. We could sedate him. There's a medical kit in storage with some mild tranquilizers. "And if he won't take them?" I had no good answer. We weren't equipped to handle psychological breakdowns. Space missions selected for mental stability precisely to avoid situations like this. Lance had passed all the same psychological screenings we had. "Let's give him some time," I decided. "Keep him busy. Maybe it'll pass." But Lance refused to leave the viewport after that. He sat cross-legged on the floor beneath it, sometimes whispering words I couldn't make out. Mark tried to engage him with repair tasks, but Lance ignored him, saying he needed to keep watching. As artificial evening approached, the time we'd designated for our main meal and rest period, Mark and I sat in the galley, speaking in low voices. "Something's really wrong with him," Mark said, pushing his reconstituted food around the tray. "I've known Lance for 3 years. He's not prone to hallucinations or delusions. It could be the isolation, I suggested, or delayed response to trauma from the crash. Maybe. Mark didn't sound convinced. But what if it's something else? What if there is something out there? I stared at him. You can't be serious. You're starting to sound like him. No, He broke off as Lance appeared in the doorway. Lance's eyes were wide, pupils dilated. His hair stuck up at odd angles as though he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. Most disturbing was the expression on his face, a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration. I need to go outside, he announced. I put down my fork. That's not possible, Lance. We don't have functioning EVA suits. The ones in storage were damaged in the crash. I don't need them. He spoke with absolute certainty. They told me I'll be fine. They're waiting for me. Mark stood slowly. Who's waiting, Lance? The others, the ones who understand what this place is. His hands twitched at his sides. They've been here before. They can help us. I rose to my feet, trying to project calm authority. No one's going outside, Lance. That's an order. Whatever you think you're hearing, it's not real. His face hardened. You don't believe me. I believe you're experiencing something, I said carefully. But we crashed 3 days ago. The trauma, the isolation, it's affecting your perception. I'm going to the airlock. He turned abruptly. Mark and I exchanged a quick glance, then followed him. He moved with purpose through the narrow corridors toward the main airlock at the ship's port side. By the time we caught up, he was already punching in the access code. Lance, stop. I positioned myself between him and the airlock controls. Think about what you're doing. There's nothing out there but vacuum. You're wrong. He tried to reach around me. Move aside, David. Mark came up beside us. Lance, buddy, this is crazy. Even if there was something out there, you'd die instantly without protection. They promised I'll be safe. Lance's eyes had a feverish gleam. They need me to go first, then they'll help all of us. I grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at me. Listen to me. There's no they. It's just us. You, me, and Mark. Whatever you think is calling to you is a hallucination. For a moment, I thought I was getting through. His eyes focused on mine, and I saw a flicker of the old Lance, rational, thoughtful Lance who'd helped patch our hull just 3 days ago. Then something changed. His expression hardened, and he shoved me with surprising strength. I stumbled backward, catching myself against the wall. You can't stop this, he said, voice eerily calm. I'm going out there. They're waiting. Mark lunged forward, grabbing Lance's arm. Don't do this! Lance whirled, his fist connecting with Mark's jaw. Mark went down hard, a look of shock on his face as blood trickled from his split lip. While I was still processing what had happened, Lance turned back to the airlock controls. His fingers flew across the keypad, initiating the cycle sequence. Lance, please, I begged, pushing myself away from the wall. This isn't you. Something's affecting your mind. The inner door slid open. Lance stepped inside the small chamber, turning to face us. For one terrible moment, our eyes met, and I saw absolute conviction in his. They're calling me, he said simply. Can't you hear them? They sound like home. The inner door closed before I could reach it. Through the small window, I watched Lance hit the cycling controls. Warning lights flashed as the air pressure equalized with whatever waited outside. Mark staggered to his feet beside me. We both pressed against the window, shouting Lance's name, though we knew he couldn't hear us through the sealed door. The outer door opened. Lance took a deep breath, as though preparing to dive underwater, and stepped forward into the darkness. He wore only his standard flight suit. No helmet, no oxygen supply, no protection of any kind. The darkness took him. One moment he was there, illuminated by the airlock lights. The next, he was simply gone. The darkness swallowed him completely, as if he'd never existed at all. Mark hit the external camera controls, bringing up the feed on the small monitor beside the airlock. The camera showed only the empty airlock chamber and the impenetrable void beyond. Lance had vanished completely. "Lance!" Mark shouted, though there was no way for his voice to carry. "Lance!" I stared at the monitor, unable to process what I'd just witnessed. The external lights should have shown Lance floating or falling away from the ship. There should have been something, a body, movement, anything. Instead, there was only that absolute, consuming darkness, exactly as it had been since we arrived. The outer door closed automatically after 30 seconds with no motion detected. The airlock recycled, refilling with air from our precious reserves. Mark turned to me, his face pale with shock. What just happened? Where did he go? I had no answer. Lance Wilson had walked into the darkness and disappeared without a trace. 3 days passed since Lance walked into the darkness. The memory of his disappearance played on repeat in my mind. His confident step into nothingness, the way the void simply swallowed him without a trace. The external cameras had shown nothing. No body, no movement. Mark took it harder than I expected. We'd sealed the airlock after Lance left, running a full diagnostic to ensure no further air would escape. Mark had helped with the procedure, his movements mechanical, his eyes distant. But when I handed him his ration packet that evening, he just set it aside untouched. "You need to eat," I told him. He glanced at the food, then back to the sealed airlock door across the corridor. "Not hungry." I didn't press him that first night. The shock of losing Lance was still fresh for both of us. I figured Mark just needed time to process what had happened. But the next morning, when I found his ration packet still unopened where he'd left it, concern crept in. "Mark," I said, sliding the packet toward him as he sat staring at a dead console. "You need your strength." He pushed it away. "Save it. We're running low anyway." He wasn't wrong about our supplies. After 6 days stranded, our carefully rationed food stores were dwindling rapidly. At our current consumption rate, we had maybe 2 days of food left, 3 if we stretched it painfully thin. Still, not eating at all wasn't an option. "That's not how this works," I said. "We both eat. We both keep our strength up. That's an order." Mark's eyes finally met mine. "For what purpose, David? So we can live an extra day in this..." He gestured around the dim cabin. "Waiting to die?" I had no good answer. Our distress beacon continued to broadcast its faint signal into the void, but after 6 days without response, hope was fading faster than our supplies. Still, surrendering wasn't in my nature. "We're not dead yet," I said firmly. "Until we are, we follow protocol." Mark looked away, but at least he opened the packet and took a few mechanical bites. It was something. Sleep became another battleground. Mark would lie in his bunk during our designated rest periods, but his eyes remained open, fixed on the ceiling. Sometimes I'd wake in the artificial night to find his bunk empty. The first time it happened, panic jolted me fully awake. I scrambled through the ship until I found him pressed against the main viewport in the cockpit, his palms flat against the glass, watching the darkness outside. "You should be sleeping," I said quietly, trying not to startle him. "I keep thinking he might come back," Mark said, without turning. "What if he found something out there? What if he's trying to return to the ship but can't find his way?" I didn't point out the obvious, that Lance couldn't have survived in vacuum without a suit. Whatever had happened when he stepped into that darkness defied explanation. He hadn't decompressed or frozen as he should have. He'd simply vanished. "Come back to bed," I said instead. "Standing here won't help." Mark didn't move. Sometimes I think I see movement out there, just beyond where our lights reach. A chill ran through me. Lance had said the same thing before he started hearing voices. "It's just your eyes playing tricks," I said, more sharply than I intended. "There's nothing out there." Mark finally turned to look at me, his face ghostly in the blue emergency lighting. "How can you be so sure? We crashed on something. This isn't empty space. Whatever it is, staring at it won't give us answers. We need rest. He let me lead him back to our sleeping quarters that night, but the pattern repeated. Each night, I'd find him at different viewports throughout the ship, searching the darkness. During the day, he grew increasingly distant, refusing to help with repair efforts or systems checks. He just stared outward, waiting. By the third day after Lance's disappearance, Mark had stopped responding to me altogether. When I spoke to him, he might nod or shake his head, but words came rarely. He'd lost weight noticeably, his face taking on a gaunt quality that alarmed me. The few bites of food I managed to force on him weren't enough. I continued my duties alone. Each morning I checked our systems. The temporary hull patch still held, though the warning lights flickered between yellow and red more frequently now. The distress beacon continued its steady ping into nothingness. I inventoried our remaining supplies, calculating and recalculating how long we might survive. That evening, I found Mark sitting on the floor beneath the observation bubble, head tilted as though listening intently. "Mark," I said, crouching beside him. "Talk to me. What's going on?" For a long moment, I thought he would ignore me again. Then he spoke, his voice rusty from disuse. "He's out there," he whispered. "Lance, I can hear him." My stomach tightened. What's he saying? Mark's eyes remained fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. He says he found the answers. He says it's beautiful out there, once you understand what it is. I grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at me. "Listen to me. Lance is gone. Whatever you think you're hearing, it's not real." "It's the same thing that happened to him, isn't it?" Mark asked, his voice eerily calm. "You think I'm hallucinating, just like you thought he was." "We've been trapped here for 6 days," I said. "Low food, recycled air, constant stress. It's affecting your mind. It got to Lance, and now it's getting to you." A flicker of the old Mark showed in his eyes, the analytical engineer who valued logic above all else. What if it's not hallucination? What if it's communication? Communication with what? With whatever this place is. He gestured toward the darkness. We assumed it's a planet or spatial anomaly, but what if it's something else entirely, something alive? I let go of his shoulders and sat back. The ship felt suddenly colder. "That's not possible. 6 days ago, I would have agreed with you." Mark's voice grew stronger, more certain. "But I've been watching, David. The darkness moves. It shifts. Sometimes I think I can see patterns in it." "You're exhausted and starving yourself," I countered. "Your brain is creating patterns where none exist." Mark shook his head slowly. "No, it's real, and Lance found a way to become part of it. He's offering the same to us." "Mark, please." My voice cracked slightly. "Don't do this. Don't go down this road." He looked at me with something like pity. "You still think we're getting rescued, don't you?" I had no answer for that. The rational part of me knew our chances diminished with each passing hour. No rescue ship had responded to our beacon. Our food would run out soon. The hull patch was degrading, yet some stubborn core of me refused to surrender. "Get some sleep," I said finally, standing up. "Things will be clearer in the morning." But I knew, even as I said it, that nothing would be clearer. The darkness pressing against our ship had only one clear message. It was patient, and it was winning. I woke suddenly in the artificial night. Something had pulled me from sleep, a sound or movement I couldn't identify. Mark's bunk was empty again, but this time I knew exactly where he'd gone. I ran through the dimly lit corridors toward the airlock. The sound of my boots against the metal floor echoed harshly in the silence. When I turned the final corner, my worst fears were confirmed. Mark stood at the airlock controls, his fingers moving over the keypad with calm precision. He'd already entered the access code. The inner door stood open, waiting. "Mark, stop!" I skidded to a halt several feet away, afraid that rushing him might only accelerate his actions. He turned to face me. His eyes looked hollow in his gaunt face. but there was a strange calmness about him that I hadn't seen in days. "I can't take it anymore, David," he said quietly. "The isolation, the waiting, knowing we're never getting out of here." "We don't know that," I insisted, taking a careful step forward. "The beacon is still broadcasting. Someone could find us any day now." Mark gave me a sad smile. "You don't really believe that." "Don't do this," I pleaded. "Don't leave me alone here." "I'm not leaving you," he said. "I'm going to find Lance. I'm going to understand what this place is. There's nothing out there but death." Mark shook his head. "No, that's where you're wrong. Lance showed me. There's something else, something waiting for us." He stepped into the airlock chamber. "It's not death, David. It's transformation." I lunged forward, but the inner door slid shut before I could reach him. Through the small window, I watched as Mark turned to face the outer door. Unlike Lance, who had seemed almost euphoric at the end, Mark's expression was one of quiet resolution. The outer door opened. The familiar, maddening darkness waited beyond. Mark took a deep breath and stepped forward. Just like Lance, he disappeared immediately. There one moment, gone the next, with no transition between existence and nothingness. The darkness claimed him completely. I stared at the external camera feed, searching for any trace of movement, any sign of what had happened to him. But there was only that same impenetrable void, unchanged and uncaring. The outer door cycled closed. The airlock repressurized automatically, wasting more of our precious air. Then silence fell, broken only by the soft hum of the ship's dwindling systems. I was completely alone. I slumped against the wall, sliding down until I sat on the cold floor. The food supply would last me a bit longer now, maybe 3 days instead of 2, but the thought brought no comfort. The silence pressed around me, heavier than before. The darkness outside seemed to watch through every viewport, patient and alive, waiting. 4 days passed in absolute solitude. 4 days of talking to myself just to remember the sound of a human voice. 4 days of watching the ship's systems gradually fail one by one. 4 days of staring into that unending darkness, wondering what had really happened to my crew. The first 24 hours after Mark disappeared, I'd thrown myself into busy work, checking systems, running diagnostics, recording log entries about what had happened. I clung to procedure like a drowning man. Each routine task kept me anchored to reality for a little while longer. But reality was becoming a scarce resource aboard the Falcon. I sat at the galley table, looking down at my last food packet. The contents looked unappetizing even before I added water, a beige powder that would reconstitute into something approximating a meal. I'd stretched our remaining supplies as far as possible, but this was it, my final full ration. My hand shook as I tore open the packet. The tremors had started yesterday, or maybe the day before. Time blurred when you had no sunrise or sunset, just the same dim blue emergency lighting marking each identical hour. "Eat slowly," I told myself aloud. My voice sounded wrong in my ears, too thin, too desperate. "Make it last." The reconstituted meal tasted like nothing. My brain registered texture, but little else. I'd been a decent cook before joining the space program. I used to make elaborate weekend breakfasts, pancakes with fresh berries, omelets with peppers and cheese. The memory made my stomach cramp harder. I managed to save half the ration for later, though every instinct screamed to devour it all. Hunger had become my constant companion, a gnawing emptiness that made sleep nearly impossible. When exhaustion finally dragged me under, my dreams were filled with food, enormous feasts that dissolved into darkness when I reached for them. After eating, I made my rounds through the ship, checking the failing systems. The temporary hull patch still held, but barely. The warning lights stayed red now, the yellow long gone. More concerning was our power situation. The backup cells were down to 15% capacity and falling. I'd shut down all non-essential systems 2 days ago. No more heating in unused sections of the ship. No more running water except for 10 minutes daily to fill my recycled bottle. Lighting reduced to emergency paths only. The distress beacon remained our biggest power drain, but turning it off meant surrendering completely. Still broadcasting, I muttered, checking the small green light on the communications array. I pushed the thought away and continued my inspection. The temperature aboard the Falcon had dropped several degrees, forcing me to wear my thermal undersuit at all times. My breath fogged slightly in the colder sections of the ship. As I passed the main viewport in the cockpit, something caught my eye. A flash of movement in the darkness outside. I froze, staring out into the void. Nothing. "Just your imagination," I said aloud, turning away. Then I heard it, a soft tapping sound from the glass behind me. I spun back. For a split second, I thought I saw a hand pressed against the outside of the viewport. Then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness. My heart pounded as I approached the glass cautiously. The ship's external lights still created that small bubble of illumination, maybe 10 feet in diameter, before the darkness consumed everything. Nothing moved within that circle of light. The tapping came again, more insistent this time, but not from the cockpit viewport, from somewhere else in the ship. I moved through the corridors, following the sound. It led me to the observation bubble, a dome-shaped viewport that allowed a 180-degree view outside the ship. The tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 like someone knocking to be let in. I stepped into the observation room and felt my blood turn to ice. Lance stood just beyond the glass, smiling at me. He looked exactly as he had before walking into the airlock, same flight suit, same disheveled hair. His hand was raised against the glass, knuckles making that tapping sound that echoed through the ship. "You're not real," I whispered. Lance's mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. He gestured emphatically, pointing to something behind him in the darkness, then beckoning me to follow. "You're dead," I said more firmly. "Or whatever happens in that void. You're gone." He shook his head, still smiling. His expression was peaceful, almost blissful. Whatever he'd found out there had brought him joy. He tapped again, more urgently. I backed away, feeling suddenly lightheaded. The lack of food and proper sleep was catching up to me. That's all this was, a hallucination brought on by starvation and isolation. "Not real," I repeated, turning away and hurrying back to the main cabin. But the tapping followed me. Different viewports, different locations throughout the ship, but always the same rhythm, always that same beckoning gesture. By what I designated as nighttime, I'd seen Lance 3 more times and Mark twice. They appeared separately or together, always looking healthy and at peace, always trying to communicate through the glass, always motioning for me to join them. I tried to sleep, covering my ears against the persistent tapping, but it was no use. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces pressed against the viewports, watching me. Morning brought no relief. I ate a quarter of my remaining food ration and felt no less hungry afterward. The tremors in my hands had worsened, and a constant headache throbbed behind my eyes. I knew the signs of starvation were setting in. Without food, my body would begin consuming itself. First fat reserves, then muscle tissue. Eventually, organ failure would follow. I checked the distress beacon again, relieved to see it still functioning. The green light blinked steadily, sending our call for help into the void. I tried not to think about how unlikely rescue seemed after 10 days of silence. "Someone will come," I said to the empty room, needing to hear the words aloud. "Someone will notice we're missing." "No one's coming, David." I spun around so fast I nearly fell. Mark stood in the doorway of the communications room, watching me with that same peaceful expression he'd worn before stepping into the airlock. Except he couldn't be there. He was gone. This was inside the ship. I squeezed my eyes shut. "You're not real." I'm as real as anything in this place. His voice sounded exactly right, the same thoughtful tone Mark always used when explaining complex concepts. You need to stop fighting it. I opened my eyes. He was still there, leaning against the doorframe. He looked solid, substantial, not like a hallucination at all. You walked into the void, I said hoarsely. I watched you disappear. I found the truth. He smiled. Lance was right all along. It's not death out there, David. It's something else entirely, something beautiful. I backed away until I hit the communications console. Stay away from me. Mark didn't move from the doorway. You're dying in here, you know. The food's gone. The power's failing. In another day or two, life support will shut down completely. Rescue will come. There's nothing to rescue you from. Mark's expression turned sad. We never crashed on a planet, David. We drifted into something else, a pocket of reality that operates by different rules. The darkness isn't empty. It's alive. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the ship's failing temperature controls. What are you talking about? But Mark was gone. The doorway stood empty, as though he'd never been there at all. I slid down to the floor, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. Hallucinations weren't supposed to be this vivid, this coherent. This wasn't just seeing things. This was a full conversation with someone who couldn't possibly be there. The tapping started again, coming from every viewport at once, a desperate rhythm that made my head pound in sync with it. I covered my ears and screamed, "Leave me alone!" The tapping stopped. The sudden silence felt almost worse. Hours passed in a haze. I drifted between consciousness and something close to sleep, never fully reaching either state. The ship grew colder as more systems shut down to conserve power. The distress beacon remained on, but little else. I saw Lance and Mark constantly now. They appeared at random throughout the ship, standing in corridors, sitting in the galley, waiting by viewports. Sometimes they spoke to me, trying to convince me to join them outside. Sometimes they just watched silently, their eyes following me wherever I went. Not real became my mantra. I repeated it with each new appearance, each new hallucination. Not real, not real, not real. But they felt real. And in my weakened state, the distinction between reality and delusion grew increasingly blurred. By the evening of the fourth day alone, I could barely stand. I'd finished the last of my food hours earlier, and the hunger pains had transformed into a strange, floating detachment. My thoughts came slowly, as though moving through thick syrup. I dragged myself to the main cabin and began pulling furniture to block the door. The effort left me gasping and dizzy, but I managed to create a makeshift barricade, not to keep anything out, but to keep myself in. I couldn't trust my own mind anymore. If I started seeing Mark and Lance as clearly inside the ship as outside, I might follow them right into an airlock. The tapping sounds grew more insistent as night fell. They came from all around the ship now, not just the viewports, but the hull itself, as if dozens of hands were beating against the metal, trying to get in, or trying to get me out. I huddled in a corner of the main cabin, wrapped in thermal blankets, listening to the chorus of taps and knocks that surrounded me. The ship felt paper-thin suddenly, a fragile bubble that might rupture at any moment and expose me to whatever waited outside. David. I looked up to find Lance sitting across from me in the cabin. He shouldn't have been able to get past my barricade, but there he was, watching me with concerned eyes. "You look terrible," he said gently. "Go away," I whispered. "You're not real." "What is real, though?" Lance leaned forward. "The ship? This metal box slowly killing you? Or what's outside? Something so vast and ancient it makes our entire understanding of the universe seem like a child's drawing." I closed my eyes. "You died out there." "No." His voice came closer. "I transcended. There's a difference." When I opened my eyes, he was kneeling right in front of me. I could see every detail of his face, the small scar near his left eyebrow from a training accident, the stubble on his chin, the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "You're starving to death," he said softly. "The ship's power will fail completely soon. Why suffer when there's another option?" "Because I don't want to die," I croaked. "That's just it. You won't die." Lance smiled. "You'll change, become part of something greater. We all did." "We?" "The others who found this place before us, the lost ships, the explorers, all part of it now." He reached out as if to touch my shoulder, then stopped just short. "It's not evil, David. It's just different, beyond our understanding until we join it." I pulled the blankets tighter around myself. If it's so benevolent, why does it feel like it's hunting me? Lance's expression turned sad. "It's not hunting you, it's inviting you. There's a difference." He disappeared suddenly, like a light switched off. I blinked at the empty space where he'd been, wondering if I'd imagined the entire conversation. The tapping continued, a constant percussion that followed me into fitful dreams when I finally collapsed from exhaustion. In my dreams, I walked into the airlock like Lance and Mark had done. I stepped into the darkness and felt it wrap around me like a living thing, pulling me apart and putting me back together in ways I couldn't comprehend. I woke with a gasp, drenched in cold sweat. The ship was silent. The tapping had stopped. I checked the time, nearly 24 hours since my last meal. My body felt impossibly heavy, as though gravity had doubled overnight. Simply sitting upright took monumental effort. A red warning light flashed on the main console. The backup power cells had dropped below 10%. Life support would begin shutting down critical functions, soon to preserve the bare minimum needed for survival. Not that it mattered. Without food, I had maybe 3 days left before my body gave out completely. The silence stretched, broken only by my labored breathing and the occasional ping of cooling metal. The absence of tapping felt wrong somehow, more threatening than the noise had been. They were waiting, watching, patient. "I won't go out there," I said to the empty room. My voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, a frail old man at the end of his life. "I won't give in." As if in response, a new sound came. Not tapping this time, but a long, drawn-out screech of metal against metal. It came from the rear of the ship, near the engine room. I pushed myself to my feet, swaying dangerously as black spots danced across my vision. Moving the furniture barricade took the last of my strength, but I managed to clear enough space to squeeze through the door. The corridor outside was darker than before, more systems shutting down to conserve power. I followed the sound, using the wall for support as I shuffled toward the engine room. The door stood half open, emergency lighting casting long shadows across the machinery inside. Everything looked normal at first glance, the main drive inactive, the auxiliary systems in standby mode. Then I saw it. A long, deep gouge in the metal wall, as if something with enormous strength had dragged a blade across it from outside the hull. The hull breach alarm should have sounded if something had penetrated the ship's exterior. The fact that it remained silent was almost more terrifying than the damage itself. I approached the gouge carefully, running trembling fingers along its edge. The metal was cold, but smooth, not jagged as it should have been if torn. This hadn't been caused by external damage or collision. This was deliberate. Mark stood on the other side of the engine room, watching me examine the wall. "It's getting impatient," he said quietly. I didn't bother telling him he wasn't real this time. Hallucination or not, he was the only company I had. "What is?" I asked. "The darkness, or what lives in it?" Mark walked toward me, his movements fluid and natural. "It doesn't understand why you resist when we accepted." "Because I don't want to die," I repeated, the same answer I'd given Lance. "You don't know what you want," Mark replied, "because you don't understand what's being offered." He reached the damaged wall and placed his palm against it. It's thinning the barriers between in here and out there, between what you think is real and what actually is. I backed away from him. If it wants me, why doesn't it just break through and take me? Because that's not how it works. Mark turned to face me. It can only take what's freely given. That's the rule. Whose rule? Mark smiled enigmatically. You're asking questions only it can answer. He vanished, leaving me alone with the damaged wall and my growing fear. I retreated to the main cabin, no longer trusting anything I saw or heard. The line between hallucination and reality had blurred beyond recognition. The tapping resumed that night, louder than before. It came from everywhere at once, a synchronized percussion that made the ship seem to vibrate with each impact. I covered my ears with a pillow, but it did nothing to block the sound. Between the taps, I heard voices, Lance and Mark calling my name, pleading with me to join them, promising answers, peace, transcendence. Not real, I whispered into the darkness. Not real. Not real. But I was finding it harder to believe my own words. What if they were telling the truth? What if there was something out there, something beyond death or conventional understanding? No, that was the hunger talking, the isolation, the fear. I had to hold on. The distress beacon was still broadcasting. Someone might still find us. Find me. Morning brought no relief. The ship's temperature had dropped further, and my breath came out in visible puffs of vapor. More systems had shut down overnight. The main console showed backup power at 7% and falling. I couldn't stand without getting dizzy now. My vision blurred at the edges, and simple tasks like checking systems required enormous concentration. I knew I was approaching the end. I dragged myself to the cockpit one last time, wanting to see if the distress beacon still functioned. The small green light still blinked, though more slowly than before. Our final cry for help, broadcasting into the void. Movement outside the viewport caught my attention. I looked up to see both Lance and Mark standing in the bubble of light created by our external lamps. They weren't wearing spacesuits or breathing apparatus. They simply stood in what should have been vacuum, smiling at me. Lance raised his hand and pressed it against the glass. Mark did the same. Their mouths moved in unison, forming words I couldn't hear. Come join us. I shook my head weakly. No. They continued smiling, patient and understanding. They'd wait. They had all the time in the world. The tapping started again, gentler this time, almost like a lullaby. I retreated to the main cabin and sealed myself in again, though I barely had strength to move the furniture. I collapsed onto the floor, pulling thermal blankets around my shivering body. The hunger had faded to a distant ache. My thoughts moved like molasses. I knew these were dangerous signs, my body shutting down non-essential functions to preserve what little energy remained. The tapping followed me, echoing through the ship. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. An invitation. A promise. A way out. No, I whispered to the empty room. I won't go out there. But as darkness closed in around the edges of my consciousness, I wondered how much longer I could resist. How much longer until weakness or madness drove me into the airlock like it had driven Lance and Mark. The darkness waited, patient and alive, watching. The tapping had become a constant companion, like my own heartbeat. I no longer tried to block it out. My strength had vanished along with the last of my food. All I could do was lie on the floor of the main cabin, wrapped in thermal blankets that did little against the bone-deep cold. The ship's systems were failing one by one. Emergency lighting flickered overhead, threatening to leave me in total darkness. How many days had passed? 8? 9? I couldn't remember. Time had become meaningless, just an endless cycle of hallucinations and brief moments of lucidity. Mark sat beside me now, his back against the wall. Not real, I reminded myself. Just a hallucination. But I no longer had the energy to say it aloud. "It won't be long now," he said gently. "The power will fail completely soon. Then the choice will be made for you." I tried to respond, but my tongue felt swollen in my dry mouth. No water for how long? A day? 2? My lips were cracked and bleeding. "The darkness isn't cruel," Lance added, appearing suddenly on my other side. "It's just different, beyond human understanding." They were both watching me with expressions of patient compassion, waiting for me to give in, to join them in whatever lay beyond the ship's failing hull. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. The metal walls of the Falcon seemed paper-thin now, a fragile bubble about to burst. I closed my eyes, lacking the strength to keep them open. Maybe they were right. Maybe resistance was pointless. I was dying anyway, alone in this metal coffin. Whatever waited outside couldn't be worse than this slow, agonizing end. The tapping stopped abruptly. The sudden silence felt wrong, jarring. I forced my eyes open. A new light pierced the dimness of the cabin, not the blue emergency lighting I'd grown accustomed to, but something harsh and white pouring through the viewports like liquid. Hallucination, I thought. Another trick of my dying brain. The visions of Mark and Lance had vanished. The bright light grew more intense, flooding every corner of the room. I raised a trembling hand to shield my eyes, the movement requiring more effort than seemed possible. A mechanical whine cut through the silence, the sound of the airlock cycling. I hadn't activated it. Couldn't have, in my condition. Not real, I tried to tell myself. But the light continued to grow, and with it came new sounds, metal against metal, the hiss of pressure equalizing, voices calling out. Human voices. Not the whispers that had haunted me for days, but sharp, clear commands. Checking life support status. Hull integrity compromised in Section 3. Energy signature minimal. They're almost out of power. The sounds echoed through the ship, too varied and complex to be hallucinations. I tried to call out, but my voice had abandoned me entirely. All I managed was a weak wheeze that couldn't possibly carry beyond the cabin. The furniture barricade I'd built against the door shifted suddenly. Someone was pushing from the other side. I watched through half-lidded eyes as chairs and storage containers slid across the floor. The door opened, and a figure stepped through. A figure in a full environmental suit, helmet obscuring their face. The reflective visor turned toward me, and I saw my own reflection, gaunt, hollow-eyed, barely recognizable. "I've found one survivor," the figure called over their shoulder. "Main cabin, he's in bad shape." More suited figures appeared behind the first. They moved with urgency, their voices muffled by their helmets. Gloved hands reached for me, checking my pulse, lifting my eyelids. Severe dehydration, malnourished, barely responsive. I tried to speak, to warn them about the darkness, about what had happened to Mark and Lance. My lips formed the words, but no sound emerged. "We need to get him to medical now." They lifted me onto something flat and rigid, a stretcher. The movement sent waves of dizziness crashing through me. The bright light swirled and fragmented in my vision. What about the other crew members? Still searching. No life signs detected yet. Check the logs. Find out what happened here. Their voices faded in and out as they carried me through the corridors of the Falcon. I caught glimpses of more suited figures moving through the ship, light sweeping across walls and floors. "Where are they?" I finally managed to whisper as they secured me to the stretcher. "Mark, Lance." The nearest figure leaned closer. "What's he saying?" "Something about the crew," another answered. "They went outside," I croaked. "Into the darkness. It took them." The figures exchanged glances I couldn't interpret through their visors. "He's delirious. Let's get him out of here." They carried me toward the airlock, the same airlock Mark and Lance had used to step into the void. Fear surged through me, giving me a momentary burst of strength. I thrashed weakly against the restraints. No, not outside. The darkness. Easy, easy, one of them soothed. You're safe now. We're taking you to our ship. The airlock cycled. I squeezed my eyes shut, not wanting to see the darkness again, not wanting to feel it pulling at me like it had pulled at my crewmates. But when the outer door opened, there was no darkness. Instead, more light poured in. Clean, bright illumination from powerful external lamps. I forced my eyes open and saw a docking tunnel connecting the Falcon to another vessel. Not the endless void that had consumed Mark and Lance, but a standard pressure tube with handholds along the sides. Transfer team to Hyperion. We have one survivor, moving to medical now. They carried me through the tunnel, each movement smooth and practiced. My fear receded slightly, replaced by confusion. Where was the darkness? Where was the void that had surrounded our ship for days? The rescue vessel's interior was a stark contrast to the Falcon's failing systems. Bright lights, steady temperature, the hum of functional equipment. The suited figures passed me to a medical team in standard uniforms. They removed my thermal blankets, attached monitors to my chest and arm, inserted an IV line with practiced efficiency. Severe dehydration. Beginning fluid replacement. Core temperature below normal. Their voices washed over me as they worked. Someone placed an oxygen mask over my face. The cool air felt like a miracle after days of breathing the Falcon's increasingly stale atmosphere. The others, I tried again, pulling the mask aside. My crew, they're out there. A woman with short gray hair pressed the mask back into place. Save your strength. We'll talk when you're stabilized. Warmth spread through my arm from the IV. The lights above seemed to pulse and brighten. My eyelids grew impossibly heavy. Sedative taking effect. I fought against the encroaching darkness of sleep, terrified it might be the same darkness that had claimed my crew. But this was different. A soft, gentle descent rather than the consuming void. The last thing I heard before consciousness slipped away was someone asking about the Falcon's logs. Did you find anything to explain what happened to the other 2 crew members? Nothing yet. It's like they just vanished. I woke to the steady beep of monitoring equipment. For a moment, I thought I was back on the Falcon, listening to the failing life support systems. Then memory returned. The rescue, the medical team, the blessed absence of that all-consuming darkness. The room around me was small but well-equipped, a standard medical bay on a deep space vessel. Fluid bags hung beside the bed, connected to the IV in my arm. The monitoring equipment displayed vital signs I couldn't fully interpret from my position, but the steady rhythm suggested improvement. My mouth no longer felt like sandpaper. My head was clearer than it had been in days. I tried to sit up and found I had just enough strength to raise myself slightly against the pillows. A door slid open, and a man in a medical uniform entered, checking something on a tablet. He looked up, noticed I was awake, and offered a practiced smile. "Good to see you conscious, Mr. Miller. I'm Dr. Chen. You've been under sedation for nearly 30 hours while we treated your dehydration and malnutrition." 30 hours. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, rusty from disuse. "Yes, you were in critical condition when we found you. Another day without intervention, and we would have been too late." He checked the monitors, nodding in apparent satisfaction. "Your condition is stabilizing nicely. We've got you on nutrient and fluid replacement therapy. It will take time to fully recover, but you're past the danger point." I swallowed, finding it easier than before. "My crew, did you find them?" Dr. Chen's expression shifted subtly. "Captain Edwards will discuss that with you when you're stronger. For now, focus on resting." "Please," I insisted. "I need to know." The doctor hesitated, then sighed. "We found no other survivors aboard the Falcon. The search team conducted a thorough sweep of the entire vessel. They wouldn't have found them on the ship," I said. "They went outside, into the darkness." Dr. Chen studied my face with the careful neutrality of someone assessing a patient's mental state. Captain Edwards will explain everything once you've had more rest. He adjusted something on the IV drip. This will help you sleep a few more hours. When you wake again, you'll be strong enough for visitors. I wanted to protest, to demand answers immediately, but weariness washed over me in an unstoppable wave. My eyelids grew heavy once more. "Rest," Dr. Chen repeated as consciousness slipped away. "You're safe now." When I woke again, I felt significantly stronger. The fog that had clouded my mind had lifted further. I managed to sit up fully and even swung my legs over the side of the bed, though the movement left me lightheaded. The door opened before I could attempt standing. A tall man with steel gray hair and the unmistakable bearing of command entered. His uniform bore the insignia of a rescue vessel captain, not the standard exploration division I was accustomed to seeing. "David Miller," he said, his voice deep and authoritative. "I'm Captain Thomas Edwards of the rescue vessel Hyperion. Good to see you awake and recovering." I nodded, suddenly aware of how I must look, gaunt, unwashed, dressed in a medical gown. "Thank you for finding me. How did you locate the Falcon?" Captain Edwards pulled up a chair and sat across from me. His posture was straight but not stiff, his expression carefully neutral. "Your emergency beacon. It was faint, almost undetectable, but our sensors picked it up during a standard sweep of the sector." He studied me with penetrating dark eyes. "Your ship was 97 light hours off your projected course, drifting in empty space." "Empty space?" I shook my head. "That's not possible. We crashed on a planet, some kind of uncharted world with that darkness." Edward's expression remained unchanged. "There was no planet, David. When we found the Falcon, it was floating freely in a region of space we call a dark zone. No planetary bodies within 50 million kilometers." I stared at him, trying to process this information. But the impact, we felt it. The ship was damaged. The hull was breached. "Yes, your ship sustained significant damage," Edwards acknowledged, "but not from a planetary impact. The Falcon encountered a spatial anomaly, what we call a dark zone. These regions appear randomly throughout deep space. They're areas where light and other forms of energy are absorbed, consumed, you might say." My mind raced back to that moment before the supposed crash, the way our exterior lights had been swallowed by the darkness, the instrument failures, the sudden violent shuddering. "The dark zone affected your navigation systems, making you believe you were approaching a planet," Edwards continued. "The damage to your ship was caused by the intense gravitational fluctuations at the boundary of the zone. But there was never any planetary surface. You were suspended in empty space the entire time." I struggled to reconcile this with my memories. But Mark and Lance, they went outside, into the airlock. I saw them disappear. Edward's face showed the first hint of emotion, a brief flicker of something like pity. "We found no trace of your crewmates, David. The external cameras on the Falcon show no record of anyone exiting the ship through the airlocks." "That's not possible," I insisted. "I watched them both leave. First Lance, then Mark 4 days later." "The logs show the airlocks were cycled twice, yes," Edwards said carefully. "But the external cameras show nothing exiting the ship. No bodies, no movement, nothing." Cold realization washed over me. "You think I'm lying? Or hallucinating?" "Neither." Edwards leaned forward slightly. "I think you experienced exactly what you described, and you're not the first." This caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Edwards sighed and stood, pacing the small room with measured steps. "The Hyperion is a specialized rescue vessel, David. We're tasked specifically with investigating ships that disappear in dark zones. Over the past 15 years, there have been 7 other incidents with striking similarities to yours." He turned to face me. "Small crews entering dark zones. Ships found drifting with minimal power and significant damage. And in every case, survivors report crew members voluntarily walking into the darkness surrounding their vessels, never to be seen again. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with my physical condition. You knew about these dark zones before our mission? They're extremely rare and unpredictable, Edwards said. The possibility of encountering one is considered statistically negligible, not worth mentioning in standard mission briefings. Not worth mentioning? I repeated incredulously. 2 men are dead because no one thought to warn us. We don't know that they're dead, Edwards corrected, his tone maddeningly calm. We only know they're gone. I wanted to stand, to confront him properly, but my body betrayed me. I remained seated on the edge of the bed, trembling with a mix of weakness and anger. What happens in these dark zones? I demanded. What took my crew? Edwards hesitated before answering. We don't know for certain. The zones themselves defy conventional analysis. Sensors can't penetrate them. Probes sent inside never return data. All we have are the accounts of survivors like yourself. And what do those accounts say? They describe exactly what you experienced, Edwards said. Crew members hearing voices, seeing visions, becoming convinced that something exists beyond the darkness, something that offers answers or transcendence. Those who resist report increasing pressure, visual and auditory hallucinations, sensations of being watched or followed, even physical manifestations like the tapping you described. My mouth went dry. You've been monitoring me, recording what I've said while delirious. Edwards nodded without apology. Standard procedure for dark zone survivors. Your experience matches the pattern precisely. So what is it? I pressed. Some kind of alien intelligence? We don't know, Edwards repeated. Some researchers theorize it's a form of cosmic predator, an entity that lures sentient beings toward it. Others suggest it's a natural phenomenon that somehow interacts with human consciousness, like deep-sea creatures attracted to a fishing lure. He paused, studying my reaction. The more mystically inclined have suggested it's a doorway to another state of existence, that your crewmates may have actually transcended into something beyond our understanding. I remembered Lance's blissful expression as he stepped into the airlock, Mark's calm certainty that he wasn't going to his death. Whatever it is, Edwards continued, you're one of the few who've resisted its call. Most survivors are like you, alone, the last remaining crew member who refused to give in despite overwhelming pressure. I thought about those final days, the constant tapping, the visions of Mark and Lance, the way the darkness had seemed alive and watching. Had I really resisted, or had I simply been too weak, too stubborn to recognize the truth they'd found? What happens now? I asked. You'll recover here aboard the Hyperion for another week or so, Edwards said. Then we'll return to Earth, where you'll undergo a more comprehensive debriefing and psychological evaluation. And the Falcon? We've retrieved your ship's logs and essential equipment. The vessel itself has been marked for salvage. I nodded, feeling suddenly exhausted. The information overload combined with my weakened state left me drained. Edwards seemed to notice. You should rest. We'll talk more tomorrow. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, David, you did everything right. You followed protocol. You tried to protect your crew, and when that failed, you had the strength to survive until rescue arrived. Not everyone does. After he left, I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The captain's words offered little comfort. I had survived, yes, but at what cost? Mark and Lance were gone, taken by something I still couldn't comprehend. And the worst part was not knowing. Were they truly dead? Or had they found something beyond human understanding, just as they'd claimed? Had I been the only one strong enough to resist, or the only one too blind to see? The darkness had released me, but I knew its memory would never fade. It would follow me back to Earth, lingering at the edges of my consciousness like a shadow, waiting, patient, alive. Because deep down I knew the truth that Captain Edwards hadn't spoken aloud. Whatever existed in those dark zones was still out there, and sooner or later, another ship would drift into its embrace, another crew would hear its call, and I would never know if I had been saved or if I had simply failed to transcend.